Hello, my name is Savicianskas. I have been in technology for quite a lot of years, in a lot of startups, which we're building and are building, I guess, technology products and other products. Most recent one being TransferGo, where I had a lot of kind of interesting experiences, meeting regulators, meeting banks, meeting customers. And when Dimitri and Diana kind of reached out to talk, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to kind of share a couple of those experiences. One of them being with the regulator, one of the regulators which we kind of had a couple of discussions with. One of them being with a batch of customers doing our research stage for how they see security, compliance, and why are they not using our services as much as they are using in other countries. And one, just how we kind of work, I guess, in general in terms of tech, in comparison to what Kristaps showed, the turtle and the hare, I guess, and why we do some things and why we don't do some things, and just package it into one beautiful talk, which hopefully you all saw the three parties, the one party being customers, one party being the banks and regulators, and the last party being us as a kind of fintech business, I guess, because in our kind of view, PSD2 is kind of PSD, and PSD2 kind of helps mostly to put fintechs into that space where we can all play around and kind of create some services. So, this is me. Thank you for a nice introduction. I will start by saying sorry, I'm a bit jet lagged, so I actually forgot some of my slides, but I'll try to catch up. I changed maybe 9 time zones in the last couple of days, so still kind of catching up. But I wanted to start with introducing how TransferGo, a remittance company, works on a high level. In a simplified way, we have 3 parties, that is the customers, us, TransferGo as a remittance company, and the banking partners and the regulators. I will try to split my talk into kind of, as I mentioned, 3 parts. The banking partners, reverse, or the banking partners and regulators, customers, and then touch some how we do stuff at TransferGo. First, I wanted to tell you a story about meeting the regulators, which started maybe 2.5 years ago, with this part, basically, where we have a lot of partners, and the way TransferGo works, we kind of connect all the customers, do our compliance, KYC, accounting, and all the logic inside to make sure we don't onboard bad people. We kind of keep a good level of risk, not above certain level, and then kind of work with a lot of banking partners. At this point, I think we have about 50 to kind of manage the payouts infrastructure, and on top of that, we kind of manage the pre-funding of all of that, just to make sure that we can achieve close to instant kind of payment network without actually going into the part of SEPA instant and other instant infrastructures. So, for example, one of the examples being all the transactions from Europe to India going in something like between 7 seconds and something like 30 seconds. And that being close to instant, basically, without the additional infrastructure. Of course, SEPA itself and SEPA Instant and the banks, because of PSD2 and upcoming changes, are helping to make it more widespread, but we are taking care of that more. So this starts with one story where we wanted to add someone outside of Europe, which, even though it's a bit tedious, the regulations and everything, and for banks and maybe for some players, it takes time to kind of implement. I wanted to share a story about one place which we wanted to integrate, which I guess doesn't have to comply with these kind of things, and for it's even more different story. I would call it PSD 0 or PSD -1 kind of story, which started from a lot of discussions with the regulator back and forth, emails, phone calls, I guess some virtual meetings, and ended up with a kind of story of meeting them and having a kind of more down-to-earth talk. I call it barriers, barriers, barriers everywhere. Each level is a barrier. To simplify it, it wasn't specifically these words. I tried to kind of generalize, but we had kind of comments which were related to the way we were doing stuff and the way the regulator wanted us. Not us, but in general, perceived security. I think the first thing which was kind of quickly bumped for us in terms of how we perceive security and how the regulator perceived security was the cloud itself. As you saw, the example in the country, the example is Turkey. And in Turkey, the regulation is more about geography and the local legislation. So the cloud concept is kind of almost a taboo. And we, being a kind of a technology company built on Amazon Web Services in the cloud, where, to be honest, security is the first thing you do. For us, it's basically easier to not allow anyone to connect to us, because that's the way any service in our infrastructure starts, than to actually limit. So, and from regulators' point of view, it was the opposite. They thought, if you're in a cloud, and everyone can connect to you. So we kind of, the first thing we had to kind of discuss was, okay, cloud is okay, but keep it locally, because it's so much easier. And we're like, okay, but what does that mean? So we got to discussions, but we also didn't kind of get too much anywhere. And then we got another comment which was like, cloud is again okay, but make sure the servers are physically in your office, which got us to thinking like, okay, knowing how, for example, again, SEPA credit or SEPA instance works, where you have to kind of have certificates, maybe a computer or something, that would maybe make sense. But again, we are a cloud-driven, built on cloud, which means we don't have servers anywhere. We just have kind of configuration and setup where we know how the security is. We know where the servers are, in which region, but we don't actually keep them. We don't actually kind of touch them just because of the actual speed it can actually produce. So again, we kind of got me and my colleagues kind of puzzled. What would that mean more? Another one was the interpretation of mobile. And I have to say one kind of statistical number here. TransferGo is predominantly mobile first. Maybe between 70 and 80% of all the traffic being mobile. So basically receiving a comment, mobile is okay, but it has to have a domain which is local, got us, again, puzzled, like, how can mobile have a domain? Like, it's an app, you know? So again, we raised the question like, okay, so what would you like us to do? To which I guess we had the different interpretations. More clarity when we met. And then we got another one, which was web is okay, but it has to work without global internet. Like we sit here. I came, as I said, from one country to another country and then here to beautiful Riga. And thinking like, if Latvia would need to be disconnected from the world, how would the systems need to be built? How would everything need to work like without? That is implied, like it has to work like that. It actually was like, that got me confused. And to be honest, the only answer I had at that moment before actually suggesting to meet the regulators and just chat a bit more low level was actually, so we need to copy the whole system and just keep it in the server in that country, in our office in that country, like answering all the questions basically. The answer was actually not bad, but I'll get to that part. And then I think one of the last kind of comments the regulator said was the web is okay, but it has to be owned by a local entity. For us, it actually wasn't a problem because as the infrastructure grows, we actually have some entities in almost all the geographies we work. So that kind of made sense, but at the same time, knowing that we're a global business and we kind of comply with different regulations, kind of was still a bit confusing. And the last one was the disappointing part where for us, which in a way it wasn't okay. So the regulator just kind of mentioned like the product is okay, but for us what matters is how the customer perceives you and information about you, rather than actually what you actually have in the product. Which was interesting because the one thing we know is that we don't know a lot of things about customers. We always kind of test things, we always ask questions, we have different interfaces, different kind of questions. We look at the data, quantitative data, to understand what works and what doesn't. And we never actually ourselves say, okay, we think we know that the customer perceives A or B. We always kind of try to validate it. Okay, this works better than this doesn't work, and so on and so on. So to hear that from the regulator was a bit confusing because we're like, okay, so we don't know that. How quick can you know that? Because that's kind of not our domain and not your domain. Again, all of this brought us to a simple kind of solution. Let's meet up. For us, it was a bit difficult. Of course, we're scattered across Europe. That meant for me and my colleague who was head of a product in TransferGo to go to Istanbul. And we had a luxury of very good investors, which helped us organize a meeting with a regulator. So basically we sat on the plane and it was like, let's meet. We come to Istanbul and we arrived to the regulator's kind of main office, which is a huge building, huge offices, and when we arrived to the office and it was like, okay, it seems like we're meeting only one person. The regulator itself is kind of, obviously has a lot of departments, a lot of people working, and we're meeting one person, and that person's kind of perception is what kind of matters for us. And so we got to kind of talking, and after talking about the high level stuff, we got to the kind of low level stuff. How can we actually solve all those things? And we kind of saw that the actual regulator bounced back from the perception of product, perception of customer, to actually like security standards built into the law. Same as I guess AML compliance and PSD stuff kind of tries to cover the core stuff, not actually the implementation. So for us, it meant like locally hosted didn't actually mean that we actually have to be locally hosted. The regulator kind of like then pushed back and said, what actually matters for us, the compliance data, the customer data, the customers who are inside our country, they need to be inside. That was kind of a bit easier task to tackle for us because we are, as I said, built on cloud. So for us, it was not instantly easy, but a bit easier to introduce a new region, which was, in that case, it was a region for Turkey, and that basically that region was responsible just for one task, to just handle the customer data. The one thing which was difficult, we had to introduce the kind of geography as a concept itself to the customer data, and basically that meant that the majority of the customers were UK and EU kind of licensed and based, so that meant that Europe can still be the region where the data can sit, and then the other customers inside Turkey and maybe other regulated countries had to sit in that other region. That kind of satisfied the regulator a lot, and we got this good kind of response. Mobile with local domain actually was even more simple because that kind of meant that the regulator perceived that everyone, even with a phone or without a phone, start their journey in a browser. A browser leads to a domain leads to downloading the actual app. We actually got to the point where we said that in the app, and the regulator was like, oh, in the app it's okay, it's already on the phone. So we actually, the solution was as easy as that. It was like just attaching a simple local domain, which led to downloading the app. And again, for us it meant just adding another region, which just works like that. But working without global internet was a tricky one, and we just agreed with the regulator to kind of, what does working mean? Because for TransferGo and any remittance business, I guess, it's from A to B, A being one country, B being another country, A being a bank in one country, banking partner in one country, B being a banking partner in another country. It's kind of global is implied in this scenario, which means that we as a company, we cannot provide even a service without being kind of global. What we agreed that it's actually like the service itself means actually just at least local customer support. Just helping the customer so they're not confused, not lost when in the unlikely event of Turkey being cut off from the whole world, they can still have someone to call to and actually have an answer and say, okay, what is happening and how we can help. Okay, we see that your money is here, and then it's being dealt and information is still safe and it's not lost. Because the one thing which, again, the regulator came back to, it was the perception of a customer, that perception that they are lost. Someone stole their money, even though I assume if the global internet is down, the world is ending, but still, the customer is safe. So basically, we kind of worked at, okay, at that point, our local team in Turkey would work with a local system, which I mentioned in a couple of slides back, to actually just provide support for the local customers, and the global can still not work until the point when the global internet is back. And as I mentioned, the owning by the local entity was the easiest part, because we start our business by, at this point, by establishing a local entity. And that local entity usually owns all the assets in that country by default, and the relationship with that local entity is still in compliance with the global entity. So basically, the local entity complies with the local regulations and at the same time complies with the global entities regulations. So we kind of, we at that point, the local entity becomes over compliant, I guess, and it is the easiest to solve, I guess. And then basically that brought us to, because it was like meeting one of maybe 3 or 4 with different regulators across Europe and outside Europe. And the reason why I wanted to tell you the story is because at the end of that meeting, my colleague Scott said to the regulators, like, I would like to be opportunistic and talk about the product use case we have, what we're actually trying to solve, and maybe you could help us understand how some regulations apply and maybe some don't apply. And the regulator mentioned this one phrase, which I also heard with a similar kind of context in another meeting with another regulator, was that in essence, we don't care about the products you build. We care that you're compliant because we issue you a license, and we don't actually issue you a license to build a product. We issue a license you to do some of the things you do. And that kind of got us like, maybe it's nothing new in general, but it changed the perception, because we as a company, because at that point I was maybe wearing a product hat as well, we were very interested in actually building products. The regulations, the compliance is actually not something we care. It's just like something we want to take care, but we want to build stuff on top, as Christoph beautifully mentioned, that a lot of things enable more things to be built on top. And we care about those beautiful things on top, and we kind of said, okay, so maybe that's a different discussion we should be having going forward. Going forward, we will not be discussing how we build the product and how we build the product, but we will be discussing how we are compliant more and how we actually are compliant in that geography, I guess. And Europe, to be honest, being much, much, much easier at that point in comparison. This brings me to the second story. A bit more, also very, very different point of view. It was maybe also 2-3 years ago. At that point, we didn't have my awesome colleague Scott, who was running a product. I was still doing some of the product responsibilities, which meant I was taking care or starting an initiative to kind of dig deeper into customers and meeting customers. In this diagram, basically the customer is here, as you see in the beginning of the whole journey, and every business needs customers, so that's very important. So at that point, we were comparing the results for, and I will again bounce back to Christoph's presentation. We were comparing results of how UK customers are very different from German customers. In the slide which Christoph showed was the numbers were a bit beautiful, but we were focusing on one segment, the migrant segment, which meant that most migrants, they come in and they're kind of new to the country, and even though they could be as tech savvy or using the technology as much as the locals, the percentage is lower. For us, UK, for example, using the card, knowing what the bank transfer is and how to use apps themselves, the adoption rate was much higher. Germany, even being the kind of, let's say, some people say the financial capital of Europe, the adoption rate was much lower, and we were very confused. Basically, what we did was, okay, let's improve the product in Germany then. We chose a method, and the customer was very confused. So many buttons. We chose a method called qualitative testing. I don't know how many of the companies and how many of you actually do that. We were doing a lot of quantitative testing, which meant we have a lot of data. Let's say we have 1,000 customers, 10 of them do one thing, 10 of them do another thing, 300 do another thing. And that's basically observation based, like, oh, okay, 1% does this, 1% does that, 90% doesn't do that. And that's kind of quantitative, and that means that it's always about the amount of users, the percentage and everything. We wanted, and at that point I was kind of facilitating to start an initiative to do more qualitative research. The methodology for qualitative research is asking a different question, asking a question of why. Why would customers do that? And that means talking to customers directly, meeting the customers directly, not observing thousands of customers, observing maybe between 5 and 8 customers, because the methodology says that to observe something like 80% of the problems the customer is facing, you need to talk between 5 and 8 people. Those 5 and 8 people will most likely, by using the product, if selected correctly, will show those 80% of the problems and why they are struggling, what is the problem they are actually facing. So we actually decided, okay, this makes sense, let's start, let's see. So we formed, I think, in Germany 2 groups of 8 that was spread out over 2 days. One group being migrants from the Baltics and maybe the Russian-speaking region to Germany. The other group was, since we were also expanding at that point to Turkey, was Turkish migrants who moved to Germany as well. So 2 groups similar in their story, that they're a migrant, not similar in their background and like ethnicity and everything. So basically a lot of things to see. Surprisingly, a lot of similar problems to see. What that meant was, again, gathering. We have offices, our main office in London, and we have an office in Vilnius as well. We have an office in Berlin as well, but that is used for sales and marketing. So we had to bring our tech and, I guess, more product people into that to do the interviews themselves. And during the interviews, the biggest problem we saw, and if you don't do research, most likely you will see that the customers, when they are in quantitative stage, they are behind multiple walls, layers, and they don't actually care about the product, about the business, regulator, bank. So they do whatever they do. When you invite them, even though you try to set up and say, okay, this is what we're doing, you don't actually need to ask for our permission. You don't need to ask for us how to use the product. just use the product and explain how you feel using the product. They actually still, because they saw us as people and we gave them nice cookies to make them feel at home and welcome, they still wanted to contribute as much as possible. They said, okay, so, but do I need to click here? Do I need to help you here? Is this how you would like me to use it? And like, we were like, the majority and a lot of the time we spent was saying, sorry, we are here just to observe, and we are here to ask a question of why. Why is this happening, what you're doing? So we had to overcome the biggest problem, which is the empathy from the customer itself, which is the opposite of what the customers usually, if they have an emotion is either it's ultra positive and that customer recommends bank, card or provider to everyone, or ultra negative and they bash a huge troll comment saying this is bad. And that's as much as you get, but in the usability testing kind of we got different feelings. So moving from that feeling, we got some insights which were A, surprising, but B, not very surprising. Most of them were related to perception of what the customers felt security is and what the customers felt security is not. In our case, that study was one of the studies, one I'm mentioning was related to A, why are they using and how they are using, for example, in terms of signing up, what's their process, and B, how do they perceive security as an item. And what that meant that some of the questions were related, how do you feel, why do you feel this way? Surprisingly, a lot of people looked and said, okay, the reason I feel safe is I look at the browser, I see green, it usually doesn't show secure, but it shows the URL green in modern browsers now. I'm safe. And we're like, okay, why do you think you're safe? I don't know, it's green. Okay. As you see, perceptions. From a technology point of view, achieving that green is not that complicated, and achieving a green for a bad person is not that complicated as well. So, okay, you perceive it as safe. In reality, is not the only element which makes you safe. The next one was, okay, I don't want to give you any data at all. Just take my money. So we were looking at the customers like, why do you value your money less than you're providing your ID? Because, like, why do you think the ID? And the answer usually was like less related with the actual resistance to give the ID. I guess it was related to resisting to give ID. More to the fact that people were just like in a hurry. They were not confident in their own kind of competence, understanding what's happening here, why the ID is needed, and you'll see in the next slide why that was the case, to actually for them to understand that that is a process not for us to be, I don't know, to block them, to not allow them to send money, but it's something which was actually to make them safer, to actually make sure that we're not, someone else did not steal their data and is not sending money on their behalf. And that brought us to another thing, an observational thing. Almost all of the customers did not read anything. Like the first page they see is like, this to be compliant, to do this, we are certified, registered, this and that. For that, you will need the ID. The ID will be used for this and that. Click, 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 click. The time they spent on the individual screen, actually, where you could read maybe in 2 minutes, because in simple, we tried to make it in simple terms, was 5 seconds. How much stuff can you guys read in 5 seconds? Not a lot, most likely. In our case, it was like, I think we had 3 or 4 people observing, taking notes. All of them were like, did not read, did not read, did not read. And then at the last step, got confused, and as you saw here, said, I don't want to provide anything, just take my money. But like, if you just would stop and see why, read. Anyway, more input for design team, I guess, to redesign the whole experience, which later proved for us that there is a way to show customers why and how they can actually be safer. The next kind of comment we got was when we started talking about why they feel safe with, for example, their classic old, but that's a bad word, but still, banks. In their case, in our case, comparing the age of the companies, the banks are much older than us. Why we felt safe, the answer was like, I feel safe because the bank has to make me safe. And we asked, like, why do you think the bank has to make, why do you think the bank will make you safe? I don't know. They just have to. Like we actually understood by digging even deeper, but the reason was because we, as a new provider, we come in and we have our compliance, and everyone has their compliance requirements, and they're quite similar. But in a lot of cases, the bank which we were talking about was their bank which we got when we were 16, when we arrived into the country. So they don't remember the compliance pain. They did it because their parents brought them to the bank. They gave it, and like you meet a teller, you meet a physical person at the bank, and actually they say, this is needed, this is making you secure, and all that, and you trust the person. Same as in the user research stage, people started kind of talking to us as a person rather than an app. So they actually didn't feel the same level of uncertainty, because in their case it was, I don't feel safe because I have to trust me. In a case where they go to a bank or someone who they know from quite a long time ago, they know that when there is a relationship built on trust. There is implied trust. And which brought us to the next point and comment, which I think 3 out of 8 people mentioned, was I need certification symbol, just a symbol. I don't need to read it. I just need to see that something's certified. You guys are certified, then I know I can give you everything. But I downloaded this, by the way. This is real, but I downloaded this. I can put this on my app tomorrow if I want. That one is nothing, it's just an icon. But if we added this to the product, and we tried doing a test, we did add it, like the conversion rate went up. Not, like by tens, but like a significant, scientifically proven amount, and we're looking there, again, perception of safeness, not actually like anything which the customer would feel and say, okay, I know this because I have studied this. ISO means this and that. This means, and I'll look into ISO if they have a certificate issued. No, they're like, I just need a sign. Sign is fine. I need the green URL bar, and I need the sign, which was, again, something which is implied trust, implied security. And the outcome of that was that, to be honest, the customers, I'm jumping ahead, sorry, that's a jet lag. The summing up was the last meeting we had that day, one of those days, was a beautiful lady. I think she was like in her 50s or something. She came with 2 small children, a bit confused, a bit frustrated because the office we were using for that did not have another elevator, so we had to help her bring her kids up. She sat down, we kind of sat the kids down, we gave them cookies. She sat down for a study, but we were like, are you sure you can actually do it because you looked like you're busy? And she was like, yeah. Actually, she kind of relaxed during the study and started saying, oh, this is so much different than I would use the product, because at home I cannot give my kids to anyone. I don't have the time. The time I'm using the app, and that was not our app because we were specifically asking for the people to not have used our app, to have used the banks or competitors, but not us. When I use a typical app like that, I usually don't have the time. The world is around me, my world is happening, and I don't have the time to actually read, to do. So I'm trying to do as little as possible to do the transaction and just forget about you. I'm done. That was kind of a, simple term to say that everything we're doing has to be packaged in a way where it takes a little time, it creates security, creates trust, and then, people don't care. So the regulator doesn't care about building products. The customer doesn't care about compliance or building products. So who should care about that? Most likely it should be the business, but how? So coming to the third part of the story, is TransferGo. I'm not going to go into the details of what technology we have, how do we do stuff, and why we do some things. I'm just going to go through the kind of simple things of just how we approach product building and compliance building. And that is basically, for us, it's, for example, since I was technically not an expert, but I was involved in preparing for PSD and PSD2 and then other regulatory things. That's one part is a lot of documents, a lot of diagrams, and a lot of kind of processes written down. Another one was actually building a system and building a product on top. To be honest, it felt like a lot of things to do, not that much time to actually build stuff. But what helps us, and I guess helps a lot in technology, I assume other fintechs as well, is that we dedicate 20-something-ish% of the time of the whole team to have no agenda at all. So for example, every Friday, the whole team can stop doing the to-dos, the roadmap, the product and stuff, and work on what they think are the new bleeding edge, interesting things, technologies and everything to help the customers. Because one kicker for us, the developers and the customer support, the customer facing, the ones who get shouted at, who get said like, I'll take you to court or whatever, they kind of interact a lot, and there is a kind of a bond between them to, okay, the developers want to help customer support want to help customers, which means that during those 20% of the time, they just kind of see, okay, what is the problem you're solving? What is actually, where is the bottleneck? What technology I could use without anything we actually have now? Which means that, for example, for us, some things like moving from a kind of closed system to more the one which adapted as first signs of open banking took us maybe a couple of weeks in comparison, because we were going outside of our tech stack, outside of our competence, and just we were looking, the developers looked around and were like, okay, this is a cool thing, this is a cool thing, and this is a cool thing. I'll try all of these cool things. If any one of them works. If we can actually build something better, we can build something better. If not, there is a solution. And then they came with much more competence on the question, and basically when we actually had to do the implementation, it was much easier. And then we define the problem by a specific problem to solve, not actually a huge, and we have this problem with a couple of vendors we use, not a huge solution to build, but something to solve that specific problem. Because for example, I think a year ago, we started shopping around for some vendors to buy some of the things in a box, which would help us with further compliance, I guess. And the problem we saw with a lot of vendors was we receive this kind of box. It has a lot of check boxes filled, and it's cool. But at the same time, we will use only like 5% of that box. We'll be paying like only 5%. So for us, the whole product development roadmap is usually like identify the problem and the requirements, and then build the minimum ourselves. The developers can innovate and just build the minimum to understand what will work with the customers, because we will do research, quantitative and maybe qualitative if we can, because that's more expensive. Then test out vendors if there are specific companies which are doing tunnel vision kind of approach, where they focus on a problem and focus on a specific thing, even if it's a bigger product. And if something applies, adopt that solution. If it's the minimum thing, keep the minimum and keep improving. If it's the vendor, integrate vendor, and forget about the problem until something goes wrong, I guess. And that meant that we could actually just say, we don't have to build everything ourselves, but we might try some things. Not everything, but some things. And focus on the competencies. For us, the competence was focusing on the customers, focusing on from A to B, and actually the compliance part was just something which we take care responsibly, but that doesn't become our competence. Our competence becomes remittance, and the compliance is just something which we either use a vendor, use a kind of a product which we built, or apply a risk-based model, basically. And the goal is always just to grow, not to build compliance tools per se. And then that brings me to kind of short overview and experience kind of thing from my perspective in terms of the PSD2, open banking, and SCA. The way I saw it in the last couple of years, having actually filled out a lot of documents for PSD2, having worked through a transition for 3DS 2.0, which I guess still is not technically there, and comment on the multi-factor authentication. I have to mention, and Dimitri asked me specifically to mention it, I'm not an expert at PSD2, I'm not an expert on the legal stuff, but I'm a person from a technology point of view who had experience implementing it, and that's just kind of general comments from my side. So for us, launching open banking started, I think, almost since the inception of TransferGo, maybe 5 years ago. It started with different kind of providers who existed maybe for couple of years at that point, and open banking at that point was, and some of them still do that and call that open banking, was a secure or semi-secure way of user kind of banking scraping, which for us, some of them seemed good, some of them not so good. So basically that included a lot of vendor research, and started with that basically. So we were using that kind of approach, vendor approach, since we are in this category of a payment initiation service provider. So we just needed someone to actually provide us with access to open banking. So that moved from the solution where the customer interface is kind of scraped or something, to the solution where the providers, vendors then moved themselves to some of the providers which can accommodate open banking. They start using open banking. Some which can't, they still use the kind of secure way of web scraping. And to be honest, we did try, having done some implementations with a minimum approach, approaching a lot of our banking partners in terms of could we connect directly to open banking. And I still hope that 2020 will be the year when we can start doing that at scale, but it was a bit slower in the last couple of years. Yeah, this is just the basics. And then the way we approached the strong customer authentication, for us, since we were cloud-based and basically, again, the innovation was at our heart, we used multi-factor authentication on our internal systems from day one, which meant that exposing that to our customers was very easy and at the same time very costly. We went with kind of two-factor authentication, the SMS-driven authentication, which meant that at this point, I think we have a couple of million customers, that all of them kind of had to go through the onboarding process, and that just meant we flooded everyone with a text message. We would have gone, and I'll show you this part, we would have gone with multi-factor authentication, not SMS, but we had experience from customer testing, and we know, sadly, because I would love for us to go to multi-factor authentication, that a lot of the customers, and this is not mine, this is a study a couple of guys did, an actual nice scientific study, testing different providers, different SMS swap techniques, where they proved that that's not secure enough, and we have to kind of move as fast as possible to multi-factor. And basically they proved, so my point is, we would love to move as fast as possible to multi-factor, but at this point the customer is on that far end of the curve where they two-factor for a lot of customers who have that 1 minute a day to use the service. Two-factor is already kind of a bit challenging. Multi-factor, which goes outside of SMS, outside of phone, goes into an app or some sort of other solution, is something out of the world. So hopefully there will be a lot of education on multi-factor, and we can start using it in, most likely not this year, more at scale, and more in the next couple of years, but I'm looking forward to almost PSD3 already kind of pushing that as a mandatory thing. Of course, it's written in PSD2 as a multi-factor, but You can still use the 2FA to push that at scale and to push the education and everything so that people can understand that. So that's my observations, I guess, and that's it. How much time? 2 minutes.
Yay! we have a lot of questions, and a few of them are really hot, like hundreds of likes and thousands of shares. Nice. So the first question is, are you required to have a financial license? If yes, what type of financial license and where?
So yes. What type? So basically, we have TransferGo has a restricted financial license in UK and an unrestricted in the Europe, which is from Lithuanian bank. And the reason we, from UK license, we do the kind of payment initiation service, which means that we are just in transit. So we need to be able to hold the money in transit. We don't actually have a wallet kind of thing. In Lithuanian license, we can actually do the whole thing, the e-money license, without the special banking license capabilities. So that's that. In the case of my example for Turkey, it was a relationship between a bank, the banking partner we had there, and us, a payment institution, and that was kind of a interim solution, because eventually it would have made our life easier to just go for the full license, and that's why the majority of questions were happening.
Perfect. I hope the question is answered.
Sorry.
No, I just don't know. Is it difficult to find bank partners in Baltics? With what banks are you working in Baltics?
So with what banks I cannot answer. Is it difficult? It proves to be a two-step process. It's easy to get an intro. It's hard to pass that one person, which was mentioned, the compliance person. So the compliance person usually is the person which we have the most interaction. But it's not easy. I think it's a nice market where a lot of people can just reach out and connect. And for us as a company, for TransferGo, the main focus, even being on top of the banks in terms of what we provide, is the relationships with banks, to make sure that the banks are satisfied, that they feel comfortable onboarding us as a customer, because we are onboarding some sort of customers on our behalf. So we actually have a track record of being a good customer to the banks, and that helps us open more doors from a compliance point of view. So it's not difficult, but it's a process nonetheless.
Okay. Are you better than TransferWise?
It depends.
Okay, that was a fast answer. Let's just go with yes.
Yes.
Is it difficult to find... wait, I already did that one. In your website stated that your license is issued in UK. Are you taking any actions because of Brexit?
I think I mentioned that we have at this point 2 licenses, one in UK, one in Lithuania. So that was done as both a precautionary, as a business planning kind of thing, to expand the number of services we provide. So yes, that has already been addressed and that has already been done.
Okie dokie. And okay, 2 more questions. Are you restricted and must keep all data in local domain, or you should just store a copy there and operate on your centralized infrastructure?
So that example was specifically addressed to the Turkish market, and the European license operates a bit differently, but we still must keep the data as safe as possible within our kind of hands, and basically to identify the customer because of GDPR reasons who we share the data with. So basically that means that we are not restricted in terms of geography. That has to be Europe, but not specific country. But we are, I guess, not restricted, but we have to inform the customers who we share or who we use the data with.
And the last question. Who pre-funds the accounts on the partner banks?
That's part of our kind of smart fund management system. So basically, on top of everything, we have kind of logic which kind of predicts how much money which we'll need in every individual account. And basically, we take care of that problem, if we can call it a problem. And we have a kind of a specific pre-funding amount of money which is used across. We rarely have situations where we don't have it covered, but at the same time, we never overexpose ourselves. So we don't keep, for example, tens of millions of euros in one Latvian bank when we only need like 100,000 or 500,000 something for that day. And that basically happens daily, or depending on the kind of bank holidays or weekend schedule, more days to cover the exposure. But it's done with some touch of AI and some touch of predictive guessing, and basically it helps us just manage the fund. So we take care of that.
Okay.